Chapter 6. The market is an unstructured environment. Unlike structured social activities that have defined beginnings and endings and rigid rules to guide your behavior, the market environment is more like a river constantly flowing, with no beginning or ending, with almost no structure. Once you jump in the river, it can change directions at any moment. It may have been flowing north when you jumped in. However, without any notice, it can start flowing south. It's unstructured to the point where you make up all your own rules to play by, with a great deal of latitude to do so. You will have to decide if and when you're going to jump in and with how much force. If you are already in, you have the option of increasing the force you apply at any time or of decreasing it. There are no rules preventing you from jumping out at any moment to change your intended direction to flow with the market, or you can jump out and stay out, and the market just keeps on flowing. In an unstructured and unlimited environment, it is essential that you establish rules to guide your behavior. You will need to create definition and give yourself direction. Otherwise, you will feel overwhelmed with too many possibilities. Without these rules, one of the most likely possibilities is that you will create devastating losses for yourself. The big psychological problem here is, if you make up and have to play by your own rules, you also have to take total and complete responsibility for your actions as well as the outcome of your actions. The degree to which you do assume responsibility is the same degree to which you can't shift it to the market and be its victim. The typical trader will do most anything to avoid creating definition and rules because he does not want to take responsibility for the results of his trading. If he knows exactly what he is going to do and under what conditions, then he would have something by which to measure his performance, thus making himself accountable to himself. This is exactly what most traders don't want to do, preferring instead to keep their relationship with the market somewhat mysterious. This creates a real psychological paradox for traders, because the only way to learn how to trade effectively is to make oneself accountable by creating structure. But, with accountability comes responsibility. The typical trader desperately wants to make money, but he has to do it in a way where there is no direct connection between what he does and the outcome that it produces, thereby avoiding responsibility if things don't turn out satisfactorily. To develop a plan, you have to anticipate events to some extent relative to the depth of your plan. When you plan your trades in advance, you are putting your vision of the future and creative abilities on the line, so to speak, and making yourself accountable to yourself. Your plan either works or it doesn't. You either have the ability to execute your plan or you don't. In any case, it is your plan and your ability to follow it, and, therefore, it is difficult to shift responsibility and lay the blame somewhere else if things don't work out. Now, when a trader doesn't understand market behavior well enough to know what he is going to do and under what market conditions he is going to do it, but if at the same time, he is very attracted to the action and the opportunities he knows exist, and if he is also impatient with the learning process, his impatience and attraction will make him feel compelled to do something, even if he doesn't know what he should do. How do you think the typical trader will resolve this dilemma? He will play follow the leader, rationalizing that everybody else is doing something, and, furthermore, all these people waving their hands and screaming can't be as afraid and unknowing as himself, so they must know what they are doing, or at least they know more than him. If he does what they do, or better yet, identifies the most successful trader and does what that trader does, then he too can make money. This type of rationale creates a herd mentality, extremely prevalent on the floor of the exchanges, where most everyone is looking for direction, assuming everyone else must know something they don't, otherwise why would they be doing anything? In a group, this collective mentality is very volatile, where one key trader can start an endless series of chain reactions where everyone mirrors everyone else, all assuming that the other guy must have some rational reason for doing what he is doing. In fact, I wouldn't even describe what goes on down on the trading floor as follow the leader. It is actually better described as follow the follower, because most traders don't know what the leader is doing or who the leader may be at any given moment. Therefore, the group's behavior is like these endless waves of back and forth movement, where the traders closest to the leaders being those who know exactly what they want to do and why they want to do it, will have the first opportunity to get on the bandwagon at the best price, and those next closest have diminished opportunities, and so on down the line until you get to the least skilled trader, who doesn't have much of a chance at all. When there is no leadership in the market, the prices usually drift back and forth in a small range until someone who knows what he is doing comes into the market. If the prices have made any significant move during or at the end of the trading day, all the crowd followers get together to find any reason or rationale that might explain the market's behavior and put it into some understandable context. Basically, what they come up with is a consensus reason for the market's behavior that day. However, the leaders, those traders who take responsibility for their trades and know exactly why they did what they did, do not feel compelled to talk to anyone and usually don't. The typical crowd follower feels compelled to find reasons outside of himself because these reasons don't exist inside of himself, and he doesn't want to think he is irrational and acts randomly. For the crowd follower, trading this way serves many functions. It keeps his relationship with the market mysterious. If he makes money, he must have done something right. If he loses money, he can blame the market, which is obviously very acceptable behavior among traders, since so many of them do it. The rational or logical explanation for the individual's part in the collective behavior will be decided on later, after the fact, by the consensus opinion of the group. This way he can maintain an illusion of being rational and responsible, and whatever happened to him also happened to a lot of other traders, so at least he knows he is not alone, which then creates a sense of comradeship among competitors. Outside of the world of trading, most people think that traders are rugged individualists, associating them with the characteristics of the entrepreneurial types, like being decisive and persevering. Most outside people would be shocked to learn that except for a small minority of successful traders, the rest fall into a group that, at any given moment, have no idea about what they are going to do next or know why they are even doing what they are doing. If you ask them to tell you specifically how they make money or lose money, they couldn't tell you. In addition, as a group, traders, except for the leaders, are indecisive and impatient to an extreme. It isn't too difficult to determine why, if you consider that under normal conditions, the frame of mind of the average trader is one notch away from unrestrained terror. Getting organized and creating structure is one obvious solution to the many psychological problems the typical trader heaps on himself. But that would also force him to cross that psychological boundary line into the realm of accountability and responsibility. Besides the outright refusal to plan trades, most traders go to great lengths to put as much psychological distance as possible between what they do and the outcome of their actions. I know many traders who can do extremely good market analysis on their own but still seek opinions of other traders on what to do and then take those trades instead of their own, simply because they don't want to take responsibility if the trade doesn't work out. And, more often than not, sticking with their own analysis would have produced far better results. There are many floor traders who trade hundreds of contracts a day, and although they have to record each trade on a trading card, they will not keep an accurate account of their net trading position, claiming they get too busy or that they added wrong. At the end of the day, they count their cards with intense anxiety, hoping or praying to whatever unseen forces that they are flat, not carrying a net long or short position. Obviously, if they were that concerned, the simple solution to their problem would be to trade only at a volume level where they can always keep track of where they are at, and if they lose track, to stop trading until they get a correct count. But they wouldn't want to do that because, if they kept track of their position, then they would have to take the responsibility for what they end up with. What if they inadvertently end up with a net long position at the end of the day and the market opens several ticks higher the next morning? The unseen market forces have thus blessed these traders with a winning position, or conversely, if the market opens lower, they can always find someone or something to blame for their bad fortune. Maybe their lucky tie was sent to the dry cleaners by mistake, or they hit 3 red lights in a row on the way to the exchange. Any reason or excuse to shift responsibility will do. These reasons can range from the most eloquent academic jargon to the most superstitious beliefs, but in essence, they all focus blame outside of oneself for unsatisfactory results. In an unlimited environment, the less structure you create for yourself, the less accountable you are, the more easily you will be swept along by the force of events, and the less control you seem to have over your life. However, having less structure has the benefit of shifting the responsibility for the events in your life to other unidentified forces. This is precisely why so many traders have such a strong belief in superstitions. If a person refuses to make any connection between his thoughts, intents, skills, and results, then it is very easy to associate one's success or failure to something like the tie one had on that day, or inadvertently making some gesture and then finding oneself in a losing trade and associating the gesture with the loss. I have a personal story to illustrate a typical superstitious belief that traders have. One morning I went into the men's bathroom at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and as I approached the only urinal not in use, a floor trader using the urinal next to the one I was about to use turned his head, looked at me, and said in a very cautious tone, "Don't use that one, you can wait for mine. I'll be done in a second." I gave him a puzzled look, and he then pointed to a penny that was at the bottom of the urinal. I gave him another puzzled look because I didn't have the slightest idea about what he was trying to communicate to me. As I proceeded to use the urinal with the penny in it, he turned with a nervous expression on his face and strode away from me as quickly as he could. Later on that day, I told one of my floor trader clients about this experience and asked if he knew what was going on. He said certainly, that it was very common knowledge that money at the bottom of a urinal is a bad omen and certainly something to be avoided. After I thought about it for a moment, I wondered what would happen if I went through the entire exchange and put pennies in all the urinals. This story illustrates how the typical trader is caught in a psychological trap of refusing to plan and create structure for his trading activity, so that he can avoid taking responsibility for his results. And by doing so, he is subjecting himself to being tossed around by the whims of the crowd, at the mercy of his own unrestrained impulses, finding himself in winning and losing positions, not knowing why or what to do next. This trap is extremely negative because it creates a potentially damaging psychological condition I call random winning and random losing. If you can't define your own behavior and that of the markets, you can't learn how to repeat your wins or prevent your losses. When you win, it is so pleasurable, it creates a need to repeat it and compels you to try again. When you follow the crowd, instead of anticipating the crowd, which would take planning, or trade off news items, tips, or isolated signals from technical systems, the anticipation of the next attempt to win automatically produces fear and anxiety. Why? Because you can't define the market conditions or the decision-making process that produced the last win, and so you can't assure yourself of the next. If you don't know what you did to win the last time, you obviously don't know what to do to keep from losing this time. The end result is intense anxiety, frustration, confusion, and fear. You feel out of control, experiencing a sense of powerlessness as you are swept along by the ensuing events and wondering what is the market going to do to you today. Consider that the markets can't do anything to any trader who completely trusts himself to act appropriately, in his best interests, under all market conditions. And before people can trust themselves in this manner, they would first have to define all those conditions and be able to recognize them. Understandably, taking responsibility is something that is extremely difficult to do. We don't live in a society that has a highly evolved concept of the growth process, and as a result, we learn to become very intolerant of mistakes. I say this because we are basically taught as children and, therefore, in turn teach our children through our ridicule of them that mistakes are something that diminish one as a person. Ridicule does not enhance a child's willingness to accept responsibility, and if he doesn't, the typical parent will then criticize the child for being irresponsible. Taking responsibility is a function of self-acceptance. You can measure this degree of self-acceptance by how positively or negatively you think of yourself when you make what you perceive as a mistake. The more negatively you think of yourself, the greater your tendency to avoid taking responsibility, so you can avoid the pain of your harsh thoughts, thus generating a fear of making mistakes. However, the greater the degree of self-acceptance you have for yourself, the more positive your thoughts will be and the greater the degree of insight you will be able to extract from an experience, instead of generating fear. The more self-accepting you are, the easier it is to learn because you are not trying to avoid certain information. I don't know of any national prerogative to teach children how to accept themselves in spite of their shortcomings, as perceived by the adults in their lives. If people had a more accepting attitude about the outcome of their actions, they wouldn't have a need to avoid taking responsibility. To be successful, the market forces you, as a trader, to be responsible in completely new ways. For example, you can't put on a trade and then release your responsibility to the market to do something for you, like give you money. The market is a fluid, ever-changing event, where at any moment some other trader may decide to jump in with enough force to change the expectations of other traders participating to the point where they reverse their positions and as a result completely negate the potential you believed existed a moment ago, when you put on your trade. In our everyday lives, objects are very stable, and day-to-day events do not change at anywhere near the rate and frequency that conditions change in the market environment. Relative to the nature of the market environment, all of us take it completely for granted that the buildings, trees, traffic lights, and streets we all know are completely stationary and will be there from one moment to the next. You didn't walk out of your front door this morning to discover the street you live on doesn't look just as it did the previous evening when you walked inside your home. If getting to the office or your place of employment represents an opportunity to make money, you would take it completely for granted that it would be possible to get there in familiar ways. However, as a potential opportunity to make money comparable to that afforded in the markets, what if the location changed on a moment-to-moment basis? What if the streets also changed their location in relationship to each other? And, furthermore, what if no one cared if you ever found your way there, making you and you alone completely responsible for where you end up? It just makes sense that to function in the market environment effectively, you will need to make yourself accountable. Otherwise, how could you ever learn how to trade if you allow yourself to be swept into or out of something by forces outside of you and inside of you that you can't identify and don't want to? The market's behavior will seem mysterious because your own behavior is mysterious. You will be in a constant state of confusion, anxiety, and fear because you don't know what to do next, the kind of state of mind that breeds superstition. Understanding yourself is synonymous with understanding the markets because as a trader you are part of the collective force that moves prices. How could you begin to understand the dynamics of group behavior well enough to extract money from the group, as a result of their behavior, if you don't understand the inner forces that affect your own? When you do understand the inner forces that affect your behavior and take responsibility for what you do and don't do, and what you can or can't do, you will begin to perceive how and why other traders comprising the group behave the way they do. When you attain some degree of control over yourself, you can then see how other traders are not in control of what happens to them, like blades of grass, all bending to the force of the prevailing wind and constantly being stepped on. You won't be able to see this until you are no longer a blade of grass yourself by evolving beyond the group mentality. Then it becomes much easier to understand the group's behavior, anticipate what they will likely do next, and take advantage of it to the best of your ability. You will understand the group, certainly, to no greater degree than you understand yourself. Creating definition and rules to make yourself accountable is but a first step on the road to lasting success. You could acknowledge their necessity and establish them, but then find to your dismay, it is extremely difficult to abide by them. In Part 3 we will examine the interacting mental forces that make it difficult to follow your own rules. Chapter 7. In the market environment, reasons are irrelevant. I have titled this chapter, In the Market Environment Reasons Are Irrelevant, in recognition of the traders who believe that if they can ascertain the reasons why the market did what it did, these reasons will help them to determine what the market will do next. To believe this assumes that traders know why they behaved as they did and that the reasons they give for their actions will aid in determining their future behavior. The reasons traders would give for their actions are irrelevant. Most traders don't know why they did what they did because most traders don't plan their trades, thus eliminating any connection between themselves and the results of their trades. Most traders act spontaneously and impulsively and then ascribe the rationale for their behavior after the fact. Most of these after-the-fact reasons are either justifications for what traders did or excuses for what traders didn't do. Fundamentally, people trade to make money. And to make money, traders have to take positions, hold their positions for some length of time, and then exit their positions. When traders enter and exit positions, they act as a force on prices, making them move. When they are observing the market, waiting to enter or holding a position, traders are a potential force that can act on prices at any given moment. If traders planned what they were going to do before they did it, then the reasons they would give for why they act as they do could definitely help other traders to anticipate how prices will be affected by their actions. This, of course, assumes that they will reveal their plans and that they will be telling the truth. There are only a few traders who make money on a consistent basis, and rarely will they reveal their reasons unless it suits their purposes. In fact, traders who are confident in their ability and know they can have a significant impact on price movement go to great lengths to keep information about their plans away from other traders because that would diminish the possibility of executing these plans. However, this is not to say that after they have taken their positions they won't purposely reveal what they have done to then draw other traders into the same position, forcing them to compete among each other to create price movement in their direction. On the other hand, traders who are not confident about what they want to do will gladly share their trading ideas with anyone who will listen, hoping to get some sort of confirmation that what they are about to do will work. So the after-the-fact reasons they offer for why they acted as they did usually just serve the purpose of easing the pain of what they perceive as their mistakes, which isn't particularly useful information. What is useful is understanding that traders typically act as a group, very similar to a school of fish or herd of cattle. Individual traders fall into specific groups that tend to perceive the same kind of market conditions as opportunities or disappointments. As a result, they will act in unison to upset the balance of the market, causing the prices to move in predominantly one direction. The various groups take positions because they believe they can make money, and they get out because they are either losing money or perceive the possibility of making any more money as diminished in relationship to the perceived risk of losing money. For example, the locals on the floor of the exchanges have the least amount of patience, are the most impulsive, are the most easily disappointed, and consequently have the smallest price objectives and shortest time frame perspectives. As a result, they are the most active and will all be trying to do the same thing at the same time. Commercials and off-the-floor retail traders are two other groups that have different price objectives and time frame perspectives from each other. Individuals within these groups will also tend to act in unison, upsetting the balance in the market by their degree of participation or lack of participation at any given moment. You can determine what market conditions in which they are most likely to participate, what conditions will confirm their beliefs about the future, and what will disappoint them. Once you learn their unique characteristics, you can anticipate how one or more groups are likely to act and determine how their activity will affect the balance of the market and the potential for price movement. Why do we trade? Every moment we exist, we are interacting with the environment, expressing ourselves in our own unique way, and thus creating our lives by the way we live it. Everything we do in every moment is some form of the way we express ourselves. We express ourselves to fulfill our needs, wants, desires, and goals. Today, most individuals can channel their energies to fulfill needs beyond the requirements of food and shelter, but to do so requires money. Money allows for a system of exchange where we can trade the goods and services created from individuals expressing themselves in highly specialized ways. Money has evolved to become the object of our needs because it represents the means or path by which we can express ourselves as individuals. All behavior is a form of self-expression, and almost any way in which an individual wants to express himself in our society requires money. So, at the most fundamental level of cultural existence, money represents freedom of expression. Individuals expressing themselves in specialized ways create a highly complex system of interdependency. To exchange goods and services, individuals have to agree on the value of those goods and services to make an exchange. I am defining value as the relative degree of importance or potential something has in fulfilling a need. The actual price at which goods and services are then exchanged will be determined by the fundamental economic law of supply and demand. In psychological terms, the law of supply and demand is founded in human fear and greed. Both fear and greed will compel people to act or not act depending on their needs in relation to the perceived external conditions. The price for goods and services will be determined by the individual's needs in relationship to their belief in their ability to fulfill those needs. Implied within that belief is their perception of the availability of the goods and services they need. Greed is founded in a belief in scarcity and insecurity. Both beliefs generate fear. I am defining greed as a belief that there will never be enough available to fulfill oneself in combination with a belief that one always needs more to feel secure or satisfied. The perception that these conditions exist either internally or externally will generate a fear that will compel one to act or not act, depending on who controls the supply. The behavior someone displays will be consistent with what they believe they must do to satisfy the deficit. If two or more people have the same fears, they will typically compete among one another for the existing supply. If the supply of something is limited in relationship to the need, those that are in need will compete for the available supply. They will compete by their willingness to exchange more resources, pay more money, than will someone else who may also be in need. If, however, the supply is great in relationship to the need, demand, there will be no fear of scarcity. Consequently, people will conserve their resources, money, by diverting them to other needs or just waiting for the possibility that the price may come down. Any system of interaction founded in individual fears of lack or scarcity will cause the price of goods and services to fluctuate in relationship to the relative degree of security or insecurity that is being experienced by the collective masses at any given moment. These fluctuating prices create economic risk for all those dependent on others to fulfill a need that they cannot fill themselves. What is risk? Risk is the possibility of a net loss of personal resources, energy, money, etc., in the exchange or pursuit of fulfilling a need. Fluctuating prices also create opportunities for those who are willing to assume the risk created by price movement. As long as there is disagreement between individuals about the value of goods and services, prices will fluctuate, thereby creating opportunities for traders to make money if they will assume the risks. Definition of trading. I define trading as two parties exchanging something of value to fulfill some need or goal. In the context of the stock or futures markets, participants trade for the sole purpose of accumulating wealth or protecting physical assets from deteriorating in value. In essence, all traders in these markets, whether they are labeled speculators or hedgers, trade to accumulate wealth. It is only a matter of perspective. For the hedger, the motivation to protect the value of an asset from economic risk is still to accumulate wealth. Hedgers will trade for a higher degree of economic certainty by transferring the risk created by changing prices to another willing trader. Typically, it will be the speculator on the other side of the trade willing to assume the risk of changing prices for the opportunity to accumulate wealth from those changes. For example, stock owners will sell their stock because they believe the possibilities for the future appreciation of the stock are either non-existent or minimal in relationship to their assessment of the risk to keeping it. They may also sell even with expectations of future appreciation if there is a need to liquidate to satisfy other needs. The buyers, the other side of the trade, believe that the stock will appreciate in value. We can assume that the buyer believes this because people trade to accumulate wealth. Since the goal of a trader is to satisfy a need to accumulate wealth, we can assume that people will not consciously enter into a trade believing they will lose or fail at satisfying their needs. Because all traders have basically the same goals, to win, we can then state that no two traders enter into a trade unless they have opposing beliefs about the future value of whatever is being traded. Keep in mind that the current price of anything is always a reflection of what someone is willing to pay and what someone is willing to sell for in that moment. So, although there must be agreement between two parties for a trade to exist at a price, inherent within the transaction is complete disagreement between buyer and seller on the future value of what they are trading. For example, would I be incorrect in stating that any stock owner will not sell his stock if he believed it had potential for future appreciation? When he sells, he has basically given up on the possibilities of future appreciation. Why did the buyer buy? To lose money? To be wrong? No, of course not. The buyer's belief in the future value of the stock is opposite that of the seller's. This disparity is illustrated even more clearly with futures trading. Of real interest is the academic community's belief that the markets are efficient, which assumes that traders have rational reasons for their behavior, knowing what they are doing and having a good reason for doing it. Academicians also believe that the markets are basically random, which seems to be a complete contradiction to a market that is supposed to be efficient. In fact, however, the market's behavior is mostly irrational, if you define rational as any action that is the result of a specific methodology or is planned in advance, and definitely not random because irrational behavior is very predictable. If you want to learn to predict price movement, you don't need to pay attention to reasons. What you need to do is determine how the majority of traders perceive the external conditions in relationship to either their fear of scarcity or their fear of missing out, or both. Chapter 8. The 3 stages to becoming a successful trader. Before we cover the 3 stages to becoming a successful trader, it would be a good idea to review some of the material already covered. In the market environment, you have to make the rules to the game and then have the discipline to abide by these rules, even though the market moves in ways that will constantly tempt you into believing you don't need to follow your rules this time. This movement allows you to indulge in any illusion or distortion that suits you in any given moment. Certainly, you wouldn't choose to feel pain, confronting your illusions about the market, if there is any reasonable information that would support the possibility of your expectation being fulfilled. In an unlimited environment, if you can't confront the reality of a loss, then the possibility exists for you to lose everything, in each and every trade. If you believe trading is like gambling, it isn't. In any gambling game, you have to actively participate to lose and do nothing to stop losing. In the market environment, you have to actively participate to get into a trade and actively participate to end your losses. If you do nothing, the potential exists to lose everything you own. When you participate in gambling games, you know exactly what your risk is and the event always ends. With the markets, you don't ultimately know what your risk is, even if you are disciplined enough to use stops, because the market could gap through your stops. Also, because the event never ends and is in constant motion, there is always the possibility of getting back what you are losing in any trade. You won't need to actively participate to get back what you are losing. You just have to stay in your trade and let the market give it to you. As a result, there is the constant temptation not to cut your losses, which is very difficult to resist. Why choose pain over the possibility of being made whole, when all you need do is ignore the risk? You create your experience of the market. Each equilibrium, the current price, presents every trader with an opportunity to either buy low or sell high relative to the next change. Except for the time it takes to execute a trade, it is basically the same market for all of us. You are either able to perceive any given equilibrium as opportunity to execute a trade, or you can agonize over what you believe is a missed opportunity from the last price change, or you can refrain from taking the trade at the current price, even though you perceive it as an opportunity, because you fear the market might make you wrong. The market does not create the ways in which you perceive it. It merely reflects what is going on inside of you in any given moment. Whether you perceived the current market condition as an opportunity and didn't act on your perception, or didn't realize it was an opportunity until after the move occurred is, again, a direct reflection of your unique psychological makeup. You attach the meaning to any particular move. From an objective perspective, the next tick up can be described as the price just moved one tick up from the previous price. That is a reality about that one tick price change we all share. However, to one trader, that one up tick could be the final defeat in a short position he had been carrying. To another trader, it could mean a perfect selling opportunity because the market just can't go higher. To a third trader, it could mean a buying opportunity because the market broke out of a resistance area, based on the way he defines resistance. The market neither chooses nor has any way of choosing the meaning you attach to any particular price change or market condition. For example, you could perceive an opportunity to sell high and act on that perception by entering the market with a short position. From the point you entered, let's say the market went in your favor and then violently reversed itself. In doing so, it very quickly went through your entry point and kept on going up with only a few rest periods and minor little retracements. Each rest or retracement could have been an opportunity to get out of your short position and reverse yourself. What would stop you? The answer is inside of you. If you breathed a sigh of relief each time the market paused or retraced a bit, choosing to believe it was finally all over, then I ask you, what is all over? Is it possibly the fact that you won't have to confront yourself and say I'm wrong? That again is inside of you. You choose, based on the makeup of your mental environment, to believe the pauses were stopping points, relief from confrontation, instead of a possibility to take advantage of an opportunity to eliminate your risk and a high probability to accumulate a profit by reversing yourself. The way the market seemed to you was actually the way you created it in your own mind. Out of all the available choices and alternate ways of considering the possibilities, you choose one particular way. Your own mental framework, controlling what and the ways in which you perceive information, locked you into that losing trade. The unique way you define a loss, your beliefs about it, and what it means to you is a component part of your psychological makeup. Your beliefs will interact with your perception of environmental information to form the particular way you pick and choose whatever information you happen to focus your attention on. The market has nothing to do with this process, even though that is where the information is coming from. In the trading environment, the outcome of your decisions is immediate, and you are powerless to change anything except your mind. The power you have to create more fulfilling outcomes from your trading resides in your degree of mental flexibility. You have to learn how to flow with the markets. You are either in harmony with them or you are not. The less acceptance you have for different types of market behavior, the more the market seems to turn on you like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In one moment it is satisfying all your needs. In the next it is like a greedy monster taking everything away. This Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde characteristic of the markets only represents your own mental inflexibility to flow with the changes and your lack of understanding. That you give yourself to the best of your ability what you end up with, out of what is available. And by the same token, what you lost, you gave away. You can't change what the market is doing. You can only change yourself in a way that allows you to perceive what it may do next with increased clarity and objectivity. As a trader, you want to know what is going to happen next. Yet, how can you begin to know what could happen next if you refuse to open yourself up mentally in ways that allow you to perceive the most likely possibilities? It is a complete contradiction in thought to want to know what is going to happen next in an event over which you have no control and at the same time to maintain a rigid mental structure that allows for only a very limited number of possibilities. This contradiction in thought is the result of not understanding the nature of beliefs and how they limit a person's perception of environmental information. When you put on the trade, you had to have some belief about the future. What you need to do is learn how to release yourself from the demand your expectations be fulfilled exactly the way you expect them to be. Releasing yourself from the demand will allow you to shift your perspective to perceive whatever opportunities exist in the market now, as if you didn't have a trade on at all. All of us are in a position of having to pick and choose environmental information because we can't be aware of everything at once. If you pick and choose market information on the basis of having to justify your beliefs, you are putting yourself at an extreme disadvantage. You will be excluding from your awareness information that may be more indicative of the consistency of the market and its potential to move in any given direction. And it will be extremely difficult to learn how to develop a perspective for the big picture by expanding your time frame perspective. So even though you can't actually control the market's movement, you can learn how to control your perception of the market's movement in a way that allows you the maximum objectivity. Learning to perceive objectively will increase your ability to let the market tell you when to get in and when to get out. You can learn how to trade where you won't be using information to justify your beliefs but rather to perceive the most likely possibilities in any given moment. As you build a solid foundation of insight and understanding into the workings of your mental environment, which I will present in chapters 9 through 14, you will learn how to change yourself in ways that will allow you to perceive the markets from an objective perspective and eventually trade intuitively. What I will be offering you in the remainder of the book is a step-by-step process of how to adapt yourself to function more effectively in the trading environment. Essentially, it is a process that will enable you to identify and manipulate your beliefs to be more consistent with your goals. There are two dominant themes that form the foundation for this approach. The first we have already briefly covered, that you create the market that you experience in your own mind based on your beliefs, perceptions, intents, and rules. And, second, your trading results will be a function of the degree of skills you develop in three primary areas: perception, or your ability to perceive opportunity; execution, or your ability to execute a trade; and accumulation, or your ability to allow your account balance to grow over a period of time or series of trades. Perceiving opportunity. Your perception of opportunity is a function of the depth of insight into the market's behavior. The depth of your insight into the market's behavior is equivalent to the number of distinctions you can make and the quality of these distinctions. Perception of opportunity is synonymous with your expectation of what the market will do next. To be effective, You will need to learn how to make kinds of distinctions that will provide you with an indication of a high probability opportunity from an objective perspective, what I call making an uncommitted assessment of the probabilities. To be able to make some kind of quality distinctions that will eventually develop into a vision of the broader perspective, you will need to learn how to expand your timeframe perspective of market activity. There are several components to this process, but the two most important are 1. Instituting a completely disciplined trading approach, and 2. Learning how to release yourself from the negative emotional energy stored in the memories of any past trading experiences. In the larger perspective, fear will reduce the likelihood of you ever developing to the point of making the kinds of distinctions in market behavior where you acquire a vision of the big picture. When you understand how fear operates in your trading and have conquered it, you will be able to see how fear operates in the market as a whole and then be able to anticipate the group's reaction to certain kinds of information. If you did not start your trading career with the proper mental perspective or with a disciplined approach, then it is likely you have suffered some degree of psychological damage. I define psychological damage as any mental condition that has the potential of generating fear. The negative energy stored in these experiences, that create and support a belief about the threatening nature of the environment, will generate fear to the same extent as the degree of energy stored in the memory. By learning to release yourself from the pain, you will be reducing the fear and automatically opening yourself up to new awarenesses about the nature of the markets. You will be opening yourself up because fear will not be causing you to narrow your focus of attention. Instead of being focused on pain avoidance, you can be focused on what the markets are telling you. Learning how to release yourself from fear will also free you up to think of creative ways in which you can respond to the new relationships you are perceiving in the market's behavior. As a result, you will be increasing your confidence in your ability to respond appropriately to any given market situation. Executing your trades. Your ability to execute your trades is a function of the amount of fear you generate or the lack of it. Fear is always the result of your beliefs about the threatening nature of the environment. What could be threatening about the market? Nothing, if you had the confidence and completely trusted yourself to act appropriately under any given set of market conditions. Essentially, what you fear is not the markets but rather your inability to do what you need to do, when you need to do it, without hesitation. In your relationship with the markets, you had to learn what to fear. What you learned to fear was a result of whatever you did that caused pain. Your pain was the result of your not knowing what to do next that resulted in an outcome you neither expected nor intended. In the market environment, you are free to act or not to act. The markets cannot do anything to you that you don't allow, even if it is out of ignorance or a complete sense of powerlessness. The effects of fear on one's behavior are obvious, limiting one to the point of complete immobility. If you can't execute your trades properly, even when you perceive the most perfect opportunity, it is because you have not released yourself from the pain contained in the memories of past trading experiences and because you still don't trust yourself to act appropriately in any given set of conditions. If you did, there would be no fear or immobility. Accumulating profits. Your ability to accumulate profits either in a single trade or cumulatively with several trades over a period of time is a function of your degree of self-valuation. This sense of self-valuation is, in fact, the most important psychological component of success and will override all others in determining your results. Your degree of self-valuation will regulate how much money you will give yourself. The market doesn't give you the money. You give it to yourself based on your ability to perceive opportunity and execute a trade, out of the maximum potential available or perceivable at any given moment or time frame perspective. Regardless of the depth of understanding you have of market behavior or what you consciously intend, you will only give yourself the amount of money that corresponds to your level of self-valuation. This concept can be explained with a simple illustration. If you perceive an opportunity, based on your definition or what market conditions constitute an opportunity, and do not follow through by executing a trade, what stopped you? In my mind, there can be only two possible reasons. You were either immobilized by the fear of failure or you are struggling with a belief, value, system that says you don't deserve the money. Otherwise, you would have acted on your perception. Self-acceptance. The second theme that provides a foundation for the belief system I am offering is that personal transformation, growth, and learning new skills are a function of self-acceptance. Your intent of learning a new skill or way of expressing yourself is in essence an attempt to create a new dimension of yourself. It is a goal you have projected out into the future that you will then attempt to fulfill by growing into it. The market will quite naturally make you face what is inside of you on a moment-to-moment basis. What is inside of you could be confidence or fear, a perception of opportunity or loss, restraint or uncontrollable greed, objectivity or illusion. The market just reflects these mental conditions, it does not create them. Therefore, to grow into a new expression of yourself, fulfill your goal of being a more successful trader, you will need to learn how to accept the existence of any of these negative mental conditions and the psychological components that create them. Cultivating a belief in accepting whatever you find inside of yourself will give you the base you need to work from to change these conditions. To illustrate this concept of self-acceptance, I will relate to you an example of a floor trader who came to me for assistance because he wanted to change his trading style. When he first went down to the floor, he got caught up in scalping because it seemed like the easiest way to make money. However, he soon found that trying to scalp for 1 or 2 ticks in the bond pit was just too physically exhausting because he had to compete with so many traders. So he decided that he needed to learn how to hang on to his trades for more than 1 or 2 ticks. The first thing we did was to pre-plan his trades. We used some fairly simple techniques to identify intraday support and resistance points within a 7 to 10 tick range. The plan was for him to stand in the pit and wait for the price to hit his target, buy support or sell resistance, execute the trade, wait for the market to hit his objective, and then exit the trade. If the market traded through his entry point in the opposite direction by more than 2 or 3 ticks, he was supposed to execute the loss without hesitation. Based on our assessment of the reliability of the support and resistance numbers, we believed he didn't need to risk more than 2 or 3 ticks to know if the trade was going to work or not. The first day that he tried to execute his plan, he did very well waiting for the market to hit his entry point. However, when it came time to execute the trade, he couldn't do it. He was supposed to buy at a support level, and he didn't do it because he thought it was going to keep on going lower. When the market didn't keep on going lower and bounced 2 and 3 ticks higher than what was his original entry point, he went ahead and bought 1 contract. From there, he was supposed to wait until the market rotated back up to test the resistance, which was 10 ticks higher than his originally intended entry point, but now it was only 7 ticks away. Instead of waiting for the market to rotate to his objective, he got out of the trade as soon as he had a 2-tick profit. A short time later, when the market rotated up to the resistance area, he did the same thing that he did in the first trade. He didn't get in at his price because he thought the market was going to keep on going. It didn't, and he sold 3 ticks lower than he originally intended and then got out for a 1-tick profit, not waiting for a full rotation. When we talked about what he did later on that day, he was extremely displeased with himself. He made himself accountable, but he did not do what he was supposed to. He didn't get in at the price he intended or out where he intended, leaving several ticks on the table, so to speak. This is a very wealthy man who only had to risk 2 or 3 ticks at the most to find out if the trade was going to work and couldn't do it. By the same token, he was so desperate for a win that he couldn't wait for his profit objective, stating that he couldn't hang on because he has been burned too many times. Obviously, his backlog of negative experiences had nothing to do with the market's behavior or the probability of any particular strategy working or not. What was even more important, however, was his lack of acceptance for his current level of skill development. His intense anger over his performance clearly indicated that he could not accept where he was at or the results it produced. That first day was not a positive experience for him, even though he had his first winning day in a long time. His lack of self-acceptance certainly won't help him hang on to winning trades in the future. In fact, he will be digging himself into a deeper hole that he will eventually have to work his way out of if he wants to achieve the success he desires. As time went by, he became increasingly more confident with his ability to define an opportunity with a high probability of success. Almost every trade he put on would immediately go in his favor, so he would rarely find himself in a losing trade. But each day was also becoming ever more exasperating because he was still only holding on for a 1 or 2 tick profit and leaving several ticks on the table as the market rotated to test the next level of support or resistance. What was even more difficult for him to deal with was that many times he had bought the low or sold the high of the day. Of course, he didn't know at the time it was going to be the high or low of the day, but looking back, he just couldn't deal with the fact that he only got 1 or 2 ticks out of it. I knew the pressure was building inside of him because each day he had more excuses related to the market for why he wasn't doing what he was supposed to and had less and less tolerance to listen to anything I had to say about the situation. All these excuses were just an indication that he would not accept who he was in relationship to who he desperately wanted to believe that he already was. He was obviously indulging himself in illusion. To be the person he wanted to believe he already was would require that he learn how to be patient, acknowledge who he now was so he could concentrate on what he needs to learn and forgive himself for what he believed to be his past mistakes and inadequacies. However, this would be very difficult because being impatient with other people had always got him what he wanted as long as he was dealing with people who perceived themselves as weaker than he. So why should he have to learn how to be patient now? Besides, if he was patient with himself, it would make it difficult to justify his impatient, intolerant stance toward others who didn't learn fast enough or made mistakes. I didn't hear from him for a while and I just assumed that he wasn't doing anything different. Then one day after the close, he called to tell me that he was going to start trading a 20 contract position. Otherwise, nothing else about what he was doing had changed, except that he had several winning days in a row consisting of 1 and 2 tick winners. I knew he was setting himself up for a big losing day, although I didn't indicate this to him in our conversation. In his mental system, he was reasoning that by trading a larger contract size he would make enough money to prove to himself and everyone else that he had finally arrived, that he was a successful trader and that he was not a person subject to deep-rooted fears. Not being one to stand in the way of progress, all I said was that I didn't think it was very prudent for him to be trading a 20 contract position, since he hadn't developed the psychological or mechanical skills to handle a position of that size. He grunted and hung up the phone. The next day he lost almost $3,000 trading 20 contract positions. He gave back to the markets all his profits, plus more, from all his successful efforts over the last 2.5 weeks of trading. At that point he was ready to listen to a plan on how he could learn how to be more accepting of himself and how to hang on to his winning trades. The following is another example of a trader who has learned self-acceptance. This trader works for a local brokerage firm, manages hedge positions for financial institutions, and also trades for his own account. I started working with him on a fairly regular basis about 3 years before the experience I am about to relate. He called me one day to tell me how proud he was of reversing his position on his last trade of the day. He said he cut his losses without hesitation and reversed his position from being short to going long. He was delighted that he felt no conflict, resistance, or mental anguish. He recognized what needed to be done and he did it. However, shortly after he did his reversal, one of the floor traders, who worked for the same firm filling customer orders, called him from the floor with some friendly advice that he should get out of his long position. Now, my client had resolved long ago that he would not place any significance on another trader's perception of the market. He had excellent knowledge of the markets and believed he could trust his ability completely to define opportunity and make assessments of the potential for the market to move. At least he thought he believed he trusted himself. After he got the phone call, he knowingly allowed himself to be influenced by what this floor trader had to say and exited his position. Within 10 minutes of doing so, the market, bond, rallied 15 ticks, just about what my client originally thought it had the potential to do when he put the position on. He left 15 ticks on the table because he let another trader influence his perception of the market. However, he did not view this experience as a missed opportunity. He viewed it as an example of how he hadn't, as of yet, completely released himself from other people's opinions of the market. He didn't miss an opportunity because given the environmental conditions he was working under, someone calling him was an environmental condition he had no control over other than not to place any significance on the information. He simply was not psychologically prepared to take advantage of the opportunity. If he had been psychologically prepared, he would have stayed with his original plan, realizing that someone else's perception of the market isn't going to be any more objective than his. Furthermore, considering the skills he had already developed, their objectivity would usually be a lot less. As you cultivate a stronger belief in self-acceptance, you will then realize how the market reflects back to you your level of skill development along with the information that will indicate what you need to work on to become ever more successful. Each moment will then become a perfect indication of your skills and your degree of self-valuation, giving you a solid base from which to improve and learn. You will eventually understand at a very practical level how you are always doing the best you can because your outcomes will be the result of your depth of insight into the nature of the market environment and your ability to act on whatever you perceive. There won't be any reason not to accept these results as you increase your understanding of how to adapt yourself to suit any particular set of environmental conditions and realize the power inherent within this understanding. If you were to deny this perfection of the moment, a lack of self-acceptance, you would, in effect, be denying yourself the kind of information you need to grow into the skills you are attempting to learn. You can't grow or expand if you are denying the existence of environmental information that would clearly indicate your level of development. Nor can you acquire effective skills when you try to build from a base of illusion about the nature of the environment and yourself. If you won't acknowledge your true starting point, you cannot take the next most appropriate step in the development of any skill you intend to learn. The most essential component in the process of transformation is learning how to recognize and then clear out beliefs that argue for the status quo, beliefs that defend against the intrusion of environmental information you refuse to consider, and learning how to read the environment in a way that will clearly point to the most appropriate path to fulfilling yourself. End of Chapter 8.
Part 3. Building a framework for understanding ourselves. At the start of this book, I said it would be a step-by-step guide in the process of adapting yourself to the trading environment. The first step in this process of adaptation is recognizing the need to adapt. If you can't manipulate or force the markets to change in a way that suits your needs, then you will need to learn how to change yourself to suit the conditions. The market places no limits or constraints on the ways in which you choose to express yourself. In that respect, unlike in the cultural environment, you have all the power. The primary purpose of Part 2, the nature of the trading environment from a psychological perspective, was to point out some of the vast differences between the trading environment and the social environment we were taught to function in, and to demonstrate clearly a need for a new perspective. The next two steps in this process are to learn how to 1. Identify exactly what changes you need to make to function successfully in the trading environment, and 2. How to effect any mental changes that are necessary. Manipulating the physical environment is as easy as moving a chair from one place to another, because that's where you want or need to sit. However, to consciously change yourself to function more effectively in a market environment that will not respond to your attempts to manipulate it, will require a thorough understanding of the nature and functioning of your mental environment. The types of changes you will need to make will fall into two broad categories. First, you will need to learn some sophisticated mental skills to adapt yourself more readily to the constant changes with which the market confronts you, which will require neutralizing some commonly held cultural beliefs about success. These are the beliefs that have the potential to distort market information. Second, you will likely need to undo any psychological injury you may have sustained from your previous trading activity. Any psychological injury diminishes your capacity to execute your trades properly. There are obviously a multitude of sub-steps to learn how to identify what you need to learn, what you need to change, and how to make those changes. The 6 chapters in this part are organized to take you through this process of adaptation by providing you with the insight you will need to understand what you have to do and why. The first thing you will need is a structural framework to make the things that go on in your mental environment more tangible and concrete. To give you this framework, I will describe, define, and organize the component parts of the mental environment into a manageable context to where you can 1. Understand your behavior. 2. Learn the various techniques for manipulating your mental environment at your conscious direction to be more consistent with the environmental conditions and your goals. And 3. Learn how to monitor your relationship with the exterior environment. It is essential that you learn how to monitor your relationship between the interior and exterior environment, because our goals, intents, expectations, needs, and wants are all component parts of our mental environment, that we project out into the physical environment for fulfillment in some future moment. In other words, they are all components of the mental environment that either happen or don't happen in the outside physical world. You need to be able to recognize immediately, especially as a trader, when you have the potential to distort the outside information to be consistent with the inner components. These distortions will inevitably result in pain and psychological injury. What I intend to demonstrate in the following chapters is, even though you cannot turn your eyes inward to actually see these mental component parts of the mental environment, it doesn't make them any less real. Besides, it isn't necessary to turn our eyes inward, because we can just as easily learn to define what is inside of our mental environment by what we see and experience in the outside physical environment. By making the connection between what we believe and what we experience, it will be a lot easier to change what we experience by learning how to manipulate our beliefs. We will examine the nature of beliefs and how they act as environmental information management systems. I will demonstrate how our individual beliefs about the nature of the market and our expectations of what it will do next manage and control the type and quality of information we perceive about it. By breaking down the dynamics of perception, you will be able to identify the various ways in which all of us place mental limitations on the market's behavior, and how these limitations cause us to distort market information. We will thoroughly explore the nature of fear and how it compels all of us to act without a perception of choice. The predominant underlying force behind most traders' actions causing prices to move is fear, the fear of missing out, competing for the supply, and the fear of loss. If you really want to understand the market's behavior to anticipate what it will do next, then you will first have to learn about and understand the underlying forces beneath your own behavior and how you process and manage information. When you understand how any number of typical market-related fears operate in your life and learn to release yourself from them, you will, in effect, be separating yourself from the crowd. When you separate yourself from the crowd and expand what you know about the forces affecting your behavior to encompass the group, it will be much easier to anticipate what the group will do, because they will merely represent a larger, collective version of the way you used to be. In other words, you will know how other traders will behave before they do, because you will be able to observe them from a detached perspective due to your having evolved beyond the choiceless state of operating out of fear. As you gain in your understanding of how beliefs interact with environmental information to control your perception and form your experience, along with learning how to distinguish between wishful thinking and what the market is indicating about itself, you will eventually be able to learn how to control your perception of the market activity in a way that allows you the greatest amount of mental flexibility, where you will be able to shift your perspective to flow with the markets and execute your trades without hesitation. If you can't change or control what the market is doing, then the only option you have left is to control yourself in a way that allows you to perceive what the market may do next, with increased clarity and objectivity, requiring a thorough working knowledge of the nature of your inner environment in relationship to the outer physical environment. Chapter 9. Understanding the nature of the mental environment. Understanding yourself and learning how to function inside your mental environment is not as difficult as you may think it is. It does, however, require that you gain a thorough understanding of the general characteristics of the mental environment, its component parts, and how they work, which is exactly what this part of the book is designed to give you. The only reason why any of this would seem so difficult is because we aren't taught how to do it when we are young. In fact, we are usually taught exactly the opposite, that the mental environment is a mysterious place that can't be understood. As a result, we end up defining mental components in a haphazard fashion, without ever really understanding the relationship between the components, or the relationship these components have with the outside physical environment, and the ways that determine how we experience our lives. So, if you are going to consciously transform or adapt yourself to function more effectively as a trader, you will need a very fundamental and practical understanding of the nature of these mental components and how they operate. As will be explained in a moment, there are vast differences in the characteristics of the mental environment, inner, and physical environment, outer, in which our bodies occupy space. Understanding these differences is a key ingredient in the process of changing yourself. As a simple example, the book you are reading exists on the outside of you, whereas the label of book, i.e., your mind's perception of the book, or any other thoughts or sensations you would experience as a result of that label, and the meaning you attach, is all occurring on the inside of you. Anything that goes on or that happens on the inside of you would constitute your mental environment. All your experiences and memories of those experiences, all your beliefs, all the emotional energy attached to those beliefs, all your feelings, needs, wants, expectations, and goals, and all your thoughts, regardless of whether or not you have expressed these thoughts into the environment, make up your mental landscape. However, before we explore the differences between the inner and outer environments, I want to point out one characteristic common to the two. They are both constructed of many independently functioning parts. Regions would be a better word to describe the inner environment that cooperate to make up the whole. Most people are very familiar with their body parts, even the ones enclosed within the body cavity. These parts are made up of cells that have distinct functions. They operate independently and cooperate with the other body parts. The sum total of these cooperating parts is our body. A simple illustration would be that eyes are not ears or lungs, they are distinct parts having unique functions within the whole. By the same token, the mental environment is composed of a number of cooperative but independently functioning regions that make up the whole of who we are. For example, a belief is not a dream, nor is a thought an emotion. Beliefs, dreams, thoughts, and emotions are all separate parts of the mental environment that interact in the same manner, at least conceptually, that your hands will interact with your eyes or your finger with your nose or your lungs with your heart. I am pointing this out because most people do not think of their mental environments in such specific ways, with highly refined distinctions among the various regions and the ways the components within those regions function. The following list provides some of the categories into which I have divided the mental environment and the components associated with each category that will be explained in the next 5 chapters. Positively charged emotions: love, happiness, joy, confidence, peace, acceptance. Negatively charged emotions: fear, anger, hatred, jealousy, disappointment, confusion, impatience, stress, anxiety, betrayal, illusions, denials, rationalizations, intellectualizations, distortions, beliefs, intents, goals, aspirations, expectations, wants, desires, demands, needs, dreams, sleeping dreams, daydreams, thoughts, attractions, memories, creativity, intuition. This is not intended to represent a complete list of components and categories of the mental environment. However, it is comprehensive enough to serve the objectives of this book, which is to give you enough of a working knowledge of how they operate and interact to affect any changes you determine are necessary to trade successfully. What exactly is the mental inner environment? I am defining the mental environment as a place where all the sensory information from the physical environment, sensory information being the way in which the physical environment acts as a force on our eyes, ears, nose, taste, and touch, gets sorted, categorized, labeled, organized, associated with, and stored. Beliefs are formed and meanings get attached. The mental environment is where our experiences of the outside world form into a complex belief structure about the nature of the physical environment and our relationship with it. There are 2 things that I want you to note about this definition. First, it is limited because it doesn't take into account mental activities that generate from within, exclusive of outside sensory information. This is something I will expand on later. Second, I am not including the brain as part of the mental environment, even though the activity of the mental environment takes place inside of the brain. Why I am not including it will become clear in a moment. One of the first characteristics you may notice about the mental components listed is that they are all intangible. You can't see, hear, touch, taste, or smell them, at least not as they exist in the mental environment. For example, no surgeon operating on living brain tissue has ever encountered his patient's beliefs, thoughts, dreams, or memories, even though he knew they were in there somewhere. Biochemists have discovered DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, while working at the molecular level of tissue makeup, and as of yet have not encountered one of the mental components listed earlier. Yet we know they exist because we can experience the results of someone's beliefs or thoughts, as they are expressed outwardly in the physical environment through their behavior. Now, for those of you who are asking yourself how do these mental components exist if they aren't tangible, and no one has ever directly experienced them, the answer is, they exist as a form of energy, and energy doesn't have mass. For example, light will pass through physical objects or reflect off them, but light will not displace anything, and electricity will pass through objects, not displace them. Entities made up of atoms and molecules will displace one another as they move into each other's space. For a long time, the scientific community believed that the atom was the smallest, most fundamental building block of existence, only to discover later that within an atom is energy. What scientists haven't figured out yet is how does something that exists without mass, the energy within the atom, become something that does have mass, the atom. In other words, how does energy go from being non-physical to physical? Albert Einstein was once asked to give his definition of matter, and he said, matter is merely energy in a form that we can perceive by our senses. Even at the atomic level, the book you are now reading and the chair you are sitting on to read it appear to your senses as if they are solid. However, that is not the case at all. Our senses cannot perceive things as they exist at the atomic level where everything is spinning, and there is space between the atoms. However, the point I am making is that all matter exists as energy at the very deepest level of existence within the atom, but not all energy exists as matter, as with light and electricity. In very general terms, mental energy, as it exists in its various, intangible forms as beliefs, feelings, emotions, and so on, has the potential to act as a force on our behavior, and consequently, as a force on the outside physical environment, corresponding to the way in which this energy is expressed. For example, mental energy in the form of a belief or memory of an experience can motivate a person to walk across a room to change the channel on his television set, because he believes a program on another channel is more worthwhile or pleasurable. Bid the price of a stock higher than the last price, because he believes it serves his best interests, or motivate masses of people to go to war, to defend or promote whatever they believe needs to be defended or promoted. These actions and their effects on the environment are the result of this mental energy expressed outwardly. What is experience? We experience the world with our 5 physical senses. This is common knowledge, but when you get down to the very basics, what actually happens to our experiences of the environment as they go from the outer physical to the inner mental environment? What we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell at a physical level is transformed into electrical impulses of energy and is sent to the brain via the nervous system. That is, at the most basic level, tangible experience of the outside world is transformed into intangible electrical energy, meaning that the tangible medium where we experience our lives, the physical environment, does not have the same characteristics and properties of the medium that represents and stores these experiences on the inside of us, the mental environment. We will examine these differences on a more practical level in a moment. If, at first, it seems preposterous to think that our experiences, environmental information, are transformed into electrical energy, then consider that we have been using an analogous form of technology mechanically for years, in the form of telephones and computers. Computers store information, sounds, and images in a number of different energy media. Telephones transport sounds and images in the form of electricity, light, or microwaves. As commonplace as all this is, there is still something fascinating about a living process that transforms sensory information, tangible experience, into electricity, and stores it that way. Everything that we have learned as individuals about the nature of our existence is stored in our mental environment at an intangible level, in a non-physical reality. Energy is real, yet it is non-physical, because it doesn't consist of atoms and molecules. Thus it can be said that energy exists in a non-physical reality. How does the mental environment correspond to the characteristics and properties of energy? Energy is non-dimensional. As we already know, energy doesn't take up space in the physical environment, because it doesn't displace anything that does take up space. This no-space characteristic of energy gives it a non-dimensional quality. In other words, anything that doesn't take up space also won't have any tangible dimensions of height, length, width, or circumference, at least not in the ways in which we would normally think of these properties. This non-dimensional quality is probably the hardest concept to grasp about the nature of energy, because even though energy is non-dimensional, it can take some form that is visible to our eyes. And anything that is visible should have dimensions that we can measure. It may seem like an obvious contradiction to say that energy can take a visible form, and yet still not have dimension. But it is not. The best example to illustrate this is with holograms or holographic photography. With a holographic process, you can create a 3-dimensional image in light projected into space that can be seen with the eyes, and it will appear to have length, width, and circumference. You could even measure the length or width of the image. However, your hands would pass right through the image if you tried, because there really isn't anything there. At least not in a physical sense. Images in light have no physical substance, so from a physical perspective, they also don't have any dimension. Relative to physical objects, energy doesn't have dimension. Memories are mental images, anything that we can see with our inner eye, like visualizations, daydreams, or night dreams, could operate very much like a hologram of laser light, an image of light that has no physical substance where space, as it relates to distance or dimension, is not a consideration. The total area available inside of our skulls is quite small, especially in relationship to what will fit from a mental perspective. We can create mental images of any size or proportion, with none of the dimensional limitations that exist in the physical environment, because these images, as an energy form, have no physical substance and thus exist in a state of form without dimension, taking up no space. You can easily demonstrate this concept with a simple mental exercise. Close your eyes and picture the last place where you went on a vacation. Where did you stay? What side trips did you take? When you imagine where you went, did you get up and move from your present location in the physical environment? Did you imagine yourself getting up out of your chair to make all the preparations that would be necessary for such a trip? Did you get in your car and mentally drive each mile to your destination, as you would if you were actually going? Probably not. The image of your last vacation most likely just popped into your consciousness. It is as if you were instantaneously transported to these locations, without regard to the space or distance that you would need to travel to get there in the physical environment. There was no space between your present location and the image of the vacation spot you hold in your memories. The nature of our dreams also illustrates this non-dimensional characteristic. First, there is no known limit to the type of dream landscape we could find ourselves in. Dreams can be as varied and diverse, if not more so, as the physical environment, and all much larger than the space available inside of our skull cavity. Furthermore, in our dreams we can instantaneously change locations without actually traveling any distance. For example, you could dream that you are in the basement of your house and then in the next instant be in your living room, without actually having walked up your basement stairs or through other rooms to get to there. Speed. The second characteristic the mental environment shares with energy is speed. Energy travels at an incredibly high rate of speed. Light, for example, travels at a rate of 186,000 miles per second, fast enough to travel around the Earth approximately 8 times in 1 second. This is so fast that, to our physical senses, it appears instantaneous or simultaneous. What I mean is, it moves so fast that our physical senses cannot detect the motion. Obviously, we can see the light, but we cannot actually see it moving from any given source to some distant point. For example, when you turn on a light in a dark room, does the room become illuminated in stages as the light travels from its source to the walls? No, to our eyes the room fills with light instantaneously, seeming to be everywhere at once in a flash. Our eyes are not constructed in a manner where we can make any distinctions in movement, so it seems as if it doesn't move at all. This instantaneous characteristic of light relates quite well to the mental environment. As I pointed out earlier, dream travel can be and usually is instantaneous. While you're having a dream, in one instant you could be in a house, and the next you could be on the other side of the world. There really isn't any travel time between these dream locations. Whatever mental mechanism prompts the change, it creates a simultaneous transfer, probably taking as much physical clock time as it does for light to fill up a dark room. However, there is another mental characteristic, actually more of a phenomenon, that best illustrates the speed at which the mental environment operates. This is something that is not experienced by very many people, but nevertheless reported by enough people in completely separate, unrelated incidents to confirm its validity. What I am referring to is the phenomenon of having one's life flash before one's consciousness, in the form of a continuous mental image from birth to the present. Something like this usually only happens in extreme life-threatening situations, where the person believes that he is only moments from death. In those few moments before the expected death, the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, feelings, and emotions of one's entire life are re-experienced. Personally, whenever I've read or heard someone's recounting of such an experience, it baffled me. I didn't understand how a person's whole life could scroll before his consciousness in a matter of moments, when it took years to experience. However, after a great deal of contemplation, it occurred to me that the energy in which our experiences are stored moves at speeds that are so incredibly fast that it would make our lives seem quite short in comparison, thus making it possible for all our experiences to scroll by in moments, regardless of how long it took actually to have the experiences. All this might be a little easier to understand if you imagine, as I did, experiences stored in a stream of light, very much like what you would see when you look at a distant star. There is a very good correlation here. For example, scientists tell us that many of the closest stars to the Earth, other than our Sun, are so far away that even at the incredible speed of 186,000 miles per second, it still takes the light emanating from these stars hundreds of years to reach the Earth. This distance between the stars and Earth is so vast that it creates a steady beam of light, billions of trillions of miles long. So, when we look at any star other than our Sun, what we are actually seeing is the light that left it hundreds or even thousands of years ago. Thus what we are seeing is light from the star's distant past. Now, if we could travel along this beam of light back to its source, what we would be seeing is light from the star's more recent past, or future from the perspective of traveling toward the star. the closer that we got to it, until we arrived at the star's present. Light from the past, future, depending on one's perspective, and present would exist simultaneously within that beam. Now imagine the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, feelings, and emotions of our experiences stored in energy as a stream of memories that we can travel along, very much like this beam of light, where we can use our consciousness to roam between the distant past to the more recent past, up to the present moment, or project these memories out into the future. If the energy in which our experiences are stored can move at speeds that are equal to or approach the speed of light, then it would offer a credible explanation as to how it is possible for one's whole life to scroll before one's consciousness in a matter of moments. To illustrate this for yourself further, imagine all your experiences stretched out like a beam of light that you could travel along at the speed of light. At that speed, add even a couple of seconds of travel time, you could get through a great deal of information. For example, if we just arbitrarily decided that it took 10,000 miles of mental energy stretched out to hold 1 year's worth of experience, then, at the speed of light, you could get through almost 19 years of memories in 1 second. Recognition of this phenomenon helps us to grasp one of the most difficult concepts about the nature of the mental environment, that it exists outside of time as we know it. That is, our physical senses lock us into perceiving an environment bounded by the limitations of time and three-dimensional space. We have to experience each moment in a linear sequence. We can't go backward and experience the past as it existed in the physical environment. Once it passes, it's gone forever. Nor can we move ahead into the future. The past doesn't exist anymore, and the future doesn't exist yet. What does exist are these seemingly endless sequences of now moments in which we experience our lives. However, the mental energy, our inner components consist of, operates outside of our normal concept of time and space, as it is experienced in the physical environment. In the mental environment, there are no spatial boundaries or time constraints. We can think in any direction we please, past, present, or future. And, theoretically, there would be no limits or boundaries as to how much information could be stored. Simply stated, time is a function of our perception of movement over distance or three-dimensional space. In other words, to perceive time, you need two key components: space that has dimensions, and movement. Both these properties obviously exist in the physical environment. It has characteristics of three-dimensional space consisting of length, height, width or thickness, and circumference. Also, the physical environment is in constant motion. The sun, other stars, the planets, and their moons are all in motion. And even though we can't directly perceive it, everything physical is in motion at the atomic and molecular level. Everything is spinning around something larger, from the tiniest atoms and molecules to the largest stars and solar systems, including the atoms and molecules in our own bodies. This spinning motion of the Earth and its orbit around the sun acts as a force on the environment, changing day to night and night to day, creating the weather and the seasons, as well as an endless number of other environmental cycles. All these cycles of environmental changes, including our own bodily cycles of growth, age, respiration, digestion, and so on, resulting from the movement of the atoms and molecules of our cells, act as a force on our physical senses, causing us to experience a constantly changing environment, one cycle after another, in straight linear fashion, thus giving us our perception of time that is always moving forward. If we couldn't perceive motion or some sort of movement over three-dimensional space to act as reference points to measure this movement, then we wouldn't be able to perceive the passing of time. For example, if we were conscious but somehow fixed in a state of suspended animation where we had no sensory input, no perception of movement of any kind, not even a heartbeat, it would be impossible to tell the difference between a few seconds or a few days. To measure time, you need a point to start from and a point to get to. These points can be measured off in distance or time, but you need three-dimensional space to get your points. We think in an environment that is more like a stream where our consciousness can roam freely between the past, present, and future, without regard to time or space. Furthermore, the actual sequences of moments that exist in the physical environment have no effect on the energy our memories are stored in. Sequences of time only have an effect on the mental environment, relative to the impact the environment is having on our senses in energy terms. You can easily demonstrate this to yourself by trying to reconstruct from your memory the last 24 hours, moment for moment. Difficult, isn't it? Now try to do it for a week ago today. The only things we remember are the significant events, the experiences that had the most impact on our senses, the ones with the most energy connected with them. That's because experiences are not recorded in our memories as moments of time, They are stored as charges of energy, and as such they have no relationship to the passing of physical clock time. Remember, energy doesn't exist as atoms and molecules, and therefore relative to our perception of the passing of time. It is not subjected to this non-stop spinning of everything that is physical. Energy can remain static or be active. For example, someone or something could remind you of an experience that happened 20 years ago, an experience that you haven't thought of since it happened. When you tap into the energy of those memories, you will re-experience the sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and most important, the emotions of that time, as if nothing had changed. In your mind, nothing has changed. The energy remained dormant for 20 years. It becomes active either when we choose to think or reflect about what is inside of us, or when we are inadvertently reminded of what is inside of us. Significantly positive, pleasurable, happy, joyful, etc., or negative, painful, terrorizing, angry, hateful experiences are easily recalled because of the amount or intensity of the energy involved with the event. These types of experiences will pop into our conscious recollection at will, but try to remember every time in your life that you brushed your teeth, took a drink of water, opened your refrigerator door, or put your shoes and socks on, and it's not so easy. These events are difficult to recall because there is very little energy connected with each of these types of experiences. Our memories are like pockets of energy that we may organize chronologically by date and time, as in the stream of light example. However, all the uneventful moments between the eventful moments seem to disappear without a trace, or get compressed as if they never happened, even though we know that they did. We must have put on our shoes and socks a month ago today, because we probably would remember walking around without them. That might be significant enough to remember. What we read, as an example, is usually quickly forgotten because there is very little impact the environment is having on our senses. Printed words on a page have very little visual impact in relationship to activities of a more experiential nature. For example, actually participating in a biology experiment will have a much greater impact from an energy perspective than will reading about one. The energy required to remember something that we read has to be generated from within in the form of concentration. So, the way in which we experience clock time is in relationship to what we are feeling, either physical or emotional impact, in any given moment. If, for example, you were experiencing terror, each second of clock time could easily seem like an hour or day. Each moment of a terrorizing experience seems to last forever, because the environment is assaulting our senses. The impact is so painful that we can't wait for the experience to end to be out of that situation. We would therefore focus our attention on how long the event is lasting, while we were waiting for it to end, thus slowing down our sense of time. Pleasurable experiences seem to fly by. We have no concept of time passing, because we are in a state of joy and happiness, and nothing takes us out of these moments to feel something less than the joy. We come out of that state of mind when the experience starts to diminish in its degree of happiness, causing us to focus more on the unpleasantness of what we are experiencing, some degree less than joy, even if it is boredom, compared to the happiness we were feeling. When our focus shifts from joy, no concept of time passing, to I can't wait for this to end, our sense of time slows down in proportion to the unpleasantness of the experience. In the physical environment, experiences take place in moments of time that pass one after another in linear fashion. What we experience in moments of time through our physical senses is transformed into electrical energy and stored as a memory relative to the degree of impact of the experience. Memories don't have any restrictions imposed on them by time because energy isn't physical. Time is one-directional, whereas in our mental environment, we are free to think about our memories at will, or by just wanting to. We can experience them as a mental image, mental sounds, mental tastes, and so on. Each of our memories makes up a part of our identity, and because they exist as an energy form, they have the potential to act as a force on our behavior. Regardless of whether we are conscious of these specific forces or not, they cause us to move through the environment in certain ways, corresponding to what we have already experienced to create more experiences and more memories. Essentially, what I am stating is that our existence straddles two very different dimensions simultaneously. We live in and perceive three-dimensional space, and, as a result, our physical senses are subject to the limitations of time, where one moment passes after another in straight linear fashion, whereas we think in a dimension where time and space as it is perceived in the physical environment doesn't exist. Now, there are some very important psychological implications within the concept that time and space don't exist in the mental environment, implications that have to do with our ability to experience happiness, fulfill our needs, and achieve our goals. which are all basically synonymous. However, before we address these implications, you will need to understand how experiences are stored in varying degrees of positively or negatively charged energy. What I call the quality of energy our memories are stored in.
Chapter 10. How memories, associations, and beliefs manage environmental information. From the moment we are born into this world, our existence acts as a force on the physical environment. We take up space that cannot be occupied by anyone or anything else. And, in turn, the physical environment acts as a force on our physical senses, creating a cause and effect relationship between ourselves and the environment. It is important for you to note now and for the rest of the book that I am defining the physical environment in the broadest sense possible, as everything outside of ourselves, including other people. Now, at the most basic level, we create experience for ourselves by the mere fact that we exist. To exist implies that our senses are alive and that we are interacting, acting as a force, with the environment, altering its makeup and consistency as we move through it. For example, our movement and behavior set off an endless series of chain reactions that alter the landscape in some way, shape, or form. And even when we aren't actively changing or manipulating the environment in some way, we are still taking up space and thus subjecting ourselves to atmospheric forces, as well as causing changes in the makeup of the atmosphere from our breathing. Memories are stored as charged energy. The experiences that result from this constant interaction with the environment will be transformed into electrical impulses of energy. As electrical impulses of energy, the experiences will carry an electrical charge. The charge will be either positive or negative, depending on the kind of impact the environment had on our senses. For example, a crying baby is acting as a force on the environment. More specifically, the baby is creating a sound that is acting as a force on the eardrums of everyone in his vicinity. How the environment responds to this force will create experience for the child and determine the electrical charge or quality of energy that is recorded in the baby's memory. Quality of energy is the relative degree of positively or negatively charged energy in which the experience is recorded. For example, if the environment responds to the child with a soothing caress, expressing love in a sense that his needs will be taken care of, then the experience will be recorded in the child's memory with some degree of positively charged emotional energy. The degree of positiveness will depend on the intensity of the experience, that is, the degree of impact the environment had on the child's senses. Pleasant, happy, joyful, and loving experiences will result in the storage of positively charged energy. If, however, the environment responds harshly, in such a way as to have a violent impact on the child's senses, by screaming, assaulting his eardrums, or slapping him to produce physical pain, then the experience will be recorded in the child's memory with negatively charged emotional energy to the same degree as the intensity of the experience. There are two basic components that make up the quality of energy in which our memories are stored. The first is the polarity of the charge, which could be positive, neutral, or negative. The second component is the intensity of the charge, ranging from extreme positive, which would be an experience of maximum intensity creating a feeling of elation, to extreme negative, which would be an experience of unbridled terror. Quality of energy is an important concept for you to understand because it affects the type of beliefs we form about the nature of the environment, which in turn affects how we perceive information and interact with the environment. The characteristics of positively charged energy. Positive energy is expansive. It promotes mental growth or learning by creating a sense of confidence, which in turn results in an openness to explore and discover the unknown. I am defining the unknown as anything that exists as a possibility in the physical environment that does not yet reside in some form in one's mental environment. Positive energy perpetuates our natural, childlike sense of curiosity and wonderment toward the environment that we are all born with. By following the interests of our natural sense of curiosity, we interact with the environment to create experience and learn something previously unknown to ourselves, thus generating a sense of excitement about life, as well as increasing our ability to operate in the environment more effectively because we are continuing to learn more about the way things exist. There is a direct relationship between how much we have allowed ourselves to learn about the nature of the environment and the degree of negatively charged energy in our mental environment. I am stating it this way with the emphasis on the negative because learning will take place quite naturally if there isn't anything in the inner environment to stop it. In other words, an absence of fear, negatively charged energy, is a critical factor in determining whether or not we will make ourselves available to learn anything new and continue to grow mentally. The characteristics of negatively charged energy. Now, throw the same child up in the air for the first time, as in the earlier example, but instead of catching him, accidentally drop him, and not only will he not ask you to do again, he will cower in terror at the very suggestion. The difference in his behavior, of course, is the result of the differences between the two experiences. In the first example, the experience was pleasurable, resulting in the storage of positively charged energy. In the second example, the experience was painful, resulting in the storage of negatively charged energy. Regardless of whether we were acting as a force on the environment, behavior motivated by our sense of curiosity, and got an unexpected or unintended painful reaction, or the environment, uninitiated by ourselves, other than the fact that we exist, acted as a force on us in a way that resulted in pain, the experience will result in the formation of a negatively charged memory. Painful memories will generate fear, causing us to perceive the environment as threatening in its ability to cause more pain in some future moment. The way we will perceive it as threatening will correspond to our memories of the experiences that resulted in pain in similar circumstances or conditions. The things we fear in the environment are those things we have learned to recognize as threatening. In contrast to the feelings of confidence and well-being that result from positively charged experiences, fear acts as a limiting or inhibiting force on both our behavior and our perception of environmental information. I am sure that everyone reading this book at some point has experienced the effects that fear can have on one's behavior. It can cause us to run from an obviously dangerous situation or completely immobilize us to the point where our body will not respond to any conscious command. Fear drastically limits our choices. It causes us to interact with the environment in ways that are limited to the structure of our memories, regardless of what the environment may be offering in the way of a new experience, or it causes us to avoid an experience completely. Interacting with the environment results in experience, and experience results in learning. If we experience the environmental present based on our individual past, or completely avoid experience altogether, we aren't learning what is being offered or available to be learned about the nature of the environment. The net result of a painful experience is that it creates a negatively charged memory, which in turn creates and perpetuates a cycle of fear. Cycles of fear then create cycles of discontent and dissatisfaction because we avoid experience. When we avoid experience, we cut ourselves off from the joy we feel when we are learning. Just as positive cycles are expansive, negative cycles are degenerative. Our painful memories keep us from learning how to interact with the environment in effective and satisfying ways that would result in happier and more fulfilling lives because we aren't learning what we need to know to experience something different. Fear limits both our range of behavior and our perception of environmental information. The ways in which it limits our behavior are obvious. However, there are many ways in which fear acts on our perception that aren't so obvious. In fact, some of the ways can be very subtle and difficult to recognize, until one learns what to look for. As traders, it is essential that you be able to observe the market's behavior from an objective perspective. To observe objectively, you will need to learn how to recognize a variety of subtle fears that will destroy your ability to be objective without really knowing it. This is a subject I will cover in much greater depth a little further on. However, before I can do so, you need to understand the nature of associations and how perception creates an energy loop between the inside mental environment and the outside physical environment. Associations. Associations seem to be a natural characteristic of the way in which we think. That is, our brains are wired in such a way as to link similar forms of environmental information together automatically. We do this in basically two ways. First, there is a natural propensity to label people and objects based on some prominent characteristic and then categorize them into associative groups. After we categorize the groups by sex, hair color, skin color, profession, economic status, educational background, and so on. We then associate whatever experience or knowledge we have about the group with everyone and everything that has those same characteristics. For example, if we have a painful experience with a person who has a skin color different from that of our own, we will automatically associate everyone with that skin color with the qualities of that one experience. The second way we associate is by linking extraneous sensory information with some event. We will automatically associate what we are smelling, tasting, hearing, or seeing along with the quality of energy of the primary experience. For example, a child getting spanked will associate all the other environmental information that his senses are inadvertently picking up with the pain he is feeling from the spanking. What he hears, smells, tastes, and sees will all be connected with the intensity of the force being applied to his body. So, if there was some song playing on the radio or a distinctive odor in the air at the same time that he was experiencing pain, he will associate the song or the odor with the pain. Now, both these environmental distinctions, a certain song and a certain smell, will be connected with negative energy in his mental environment. When the child was getting his spanking, he may not have even noticed either the song or the smell because his attention was obviously focused in other directions. However, in the future, whenever he hears that song or smells that particular odor, they will automatically cause him to experience the negative energy connected with the spanking. Even if it is years later, and he is enjoying himself with the last thing on his mind being the memory of that spanking, if he hears that particular song or smells that particular odor, it will carry him back to that time as if it were the present moment, changing his experience from happiness to anger, sadness, or guilt. Of course, this same principle also works for positive experiences. A perfect example is many couples have a song that they associate with some intense sexual or loving experience. When they hear their song, it will mentally put them into the feelings of the experience the song is associated with. In fact, the song can eventually come to symbolize the quality of the entire relationship where all the memories and emotions connected to those memories will run through their consciousness upon hearing the song. Associations are an automatic function of the way in which information gets organized in our mental systems. Most of these associations are inadvertent, meaning we have positively or negatively charged energy connected to various elements of the environment, and we aren't consciously aware of it. We can see, hear, taste, or smell certain things that, in turn, cause us to feel emotions and not know why because we don't consciously remember connecting the extraneous sensory information with the primary event. The energy loop between the physical and mental environments. None of us has access to all the environmental information that exists in any given moment. Our senses aren't constructed to allow us to pick up, see, hear, touch, taste, or smell everything at once. If we can't be aware of it all, then we must have some mechanism by which we pick and choose what we do become aware of and give our attention and consideration to. What we learn creates an energy loop between the inner and outer environment. We can call this energy loop perception. Perception is recognizing, with our eyes, ears, nose, taste, and touch, in the physical environment what we have already learned about it. Mental energy works in conjunction with our physical senses to separate, categorize, and organize environmental information based on the distinctions we have learned to make. We recognize what we have learned in the environment because it is already inside of us. There has to be a mental framework to accept the information. Otherwise, it gets rejected, labeled as meaningless, or not perceived at all, unless of course we are willing to construct a framework for it, being open to learn. Distinctions. Distinctions make separations in environmental information where no previous separation existed. A child won't make a distinction between a spoon and pencil until someone teaches him the difference. Otherwise, he will instinctively put both in his mouth until the information stored in his mental environment acts as a force on his perception to distinguish between the two. Environmental objects give off information about themselves, but the information that is perceived already exists inside of each individual, unless it is a first-time experience. The spoon and the information about what it is create an energy loop between the inside and the outside, where before the distinction was learned, the spoon and he pencil would fall into the same category as something to put into the mouth. Anything we don't know, but exists in the environment as a possibility, is a distinction that we haven't learned to make yet. If we haven't learned to make the distinction, we won't perceive the various types of information the environment is giving off about itself. For example, if I were to open up my computer, what I would perceive would be very different from that of a skilled computer repair technician. All the various parts giving off information about themselves would mean almost nothing to me because there is no meaning inside of me. All the parts my eyes would be seeing would fall into that one large category because I haven't learned to make any distinctions between the various parts, whereas the technician would perceive the parts in a very different way because he understands the functioning of the parts and the relationship that they have with one another. That understanding is the mental framework that structures the particular way in which he perceives the parts. The parts would be giving off information about themselves that I couldn't perceive because I don't have the mental structure to perceive it. Learning how to read the markets to recognize an opportunity is another example to illustrate this energy loop between the inside and outside that we call perception. Traders act as a force on the market to move prices. Since most traders don't plan their trades or want to take responsibility for their outcomes, they are highly susceptible to acting out of any number of fears. Traders who are motivated to act out of fear generally aren't aware that their fear drastically reduces the choices they perceive as available, making their behavior very predictable to an objective observer, someone not caught in the same cycles of fear. So, under certain market conditions, large groups of traders will all be trying to do the same thing because of what they fear will or won't happen, upsetting the equilibrium, forcing prices to move in one direction. If you haven't yet learned to identify these conditions, you naturally won't perceive them when they exist because there has to be an energy loop between the inner and outer environments for perception to occur. I am sure everyone has had the experience of reading unfamiliar material a second, third, or fourth time and perceiving something new with each subsequent reading. What is happening here? With each reading, you are building a mental framework that enables you to recognize what was available but unperceivable to you when it was read previously. That is, all the new insight that you garner with each reading was available from the book the moment you picked it up the first time. However, you weren't able to perceive what it had to offer in the way of insights or understandings until you created an energy loop that enabled you to perceive it. Otherwise, the words get read but the insight goes by completely unnoticed even though you are looking right at it. In any given moment, there is a vast difference between what each of us perceives and what is actually available in the way of possible distinctions from the environment's perspective. Take, for example, a salesperson who has learned to recognize the exact, most appropriate moment to ask for the order and close a sale. Or an auto mechanic who knows exactly what is wrong with a car by the kind of sounds that it makes. To the inexperienced salesperson or auto mechanic, these abilities will seem like magic because they will assume that they are hearing or seeing the same things as their experienced counterparts. However, that is not the case. They are not hearing or seeing the same information even though they are in the same sales interview or listening to the same car at the exact same moment. They are actually perceiving different environmental information because of the differences in the structure of their respective mental environments. The information that indicates the exact moment to ask for the order to close the sale is indistinguishable from everything else to the inexperienced salesperson. The same is true for the inexperienced auto mechanic. Consequently, neither one will perceive the existence of this information until they learn to make the appropriate distinctions. If someone wasn't there to teach them how to make these more refined distinctions that indicate the most appropriate moment to ask, they may never know about the existence of such information. By learning to make more distinctions, we increase the depth of our level of understanding of the cause and effect relationship between everything that exists. How our perceptions shape our experiences. We experience the environment through our senses. At the most fundamental level, the world gets transformed into electrical impulses of energy that carries information, as well as feelings and emotions ranging from extreme happiness to rage, elation to despair, love to hate, and all the degrees of feelings and emotions in between. Each first-time encounter with the environment creates a memory, distinction, or association that didn't exist previously. A first-time encounter is any experience that is completely unique, like learning the meaning of a word that we have never heard before, and there is nothing in our mental environment to relate it to. These new memories, distinctions, and associations build into a mental framework that constitute what we have learned about the nature of the outside environment. Once we learn something, mental energy will then act as a force on our senses to recognize in the environment what we have learned about it. So there is a two-way flow of energy. First, we learn something through some unique experience. Then, we perceive what we have learned in the environment. Fear is a perfect example for illustrating this concept. We feel fear when we recognize in the environment anything that we have learned can cause us pain. We will feel this fear and consequently have a fearful experience because the negatively charged energy in our memories, distinctions, and associations will act as a force on our eyes, ears, nose, and sense of touch to recognize in the environment anything that is similar to what we have already learned can cause pain. So when we perceive something, recognizing what we have already learned, in the environment, mental energy is acting as a force on our senses, instead of the environment acting as a force on our senses. In other words, the conditions are similar or identical to what we already know, and we can therefore attach some meaning to the information. The environment isn't creating the meaning as in a first-time encounter. The meaning is already inside of us, and in essence we create the experience by the way in which we perceive it, through our memories, distinctions, and associations. This is why a group of people can all be in the same location, be exposed to the same environmental information, and then afterward describe the event in a different way. The event was different for each individual because everyone experienced it differently. Their experience was a function of the structure of their mental environment. Each individual will make different associations with the same information and then experience the varying degrees of positive or negative energy connected with those associations. Each individual will make different distinctions with the same information, in effect placing a different meaning on it. Each meaning will be composed of varying degrees of positive or negative energy, thereby creating a different experience relative to everyone else's. Each person will experience the amount of time the event took differently, depending on whether they are perceiving the experience with predominantly positively charged energy, time speeds up, or negatively charged energy, time slows down. Without taking all these mental variables into consideration, it is little wonder why people get so frustrated with one another when they can't agree on what happened. Everybody's version of what happened was unique, because the way each of us experience the outside environment is determined by how we perceive it, and how we perceive it is a function of what is already inside of us unless we are in the process learning something new. The implications are that much of what we experience of the outside environment is shaped from the inside, not from the outside as most people would assume. In other words, our first-time experiences shape the meaning, as well as determine the quality of energy connected with that meaning. And then once the meaning exists inside of us, it shapes our experience of the outside by the way we pick and choose information and how we feel about that information. This is a very important concept, so I will give you another example to illustrate how our perceptions shape the way we experience the environment. Let's say that I am approaching a statue of a man. At first, I look at the statue face to face, and I experience indifference. That is, what I am seeing does not evoke any particular emotion. Then, I walk around the statue and change my viewing angle until I look at it in profile. As I look at the profile, the face reminds me of a someone, an association, whom I like very much and whom I haven't seen for years. From this new perspective, the statue would take on a new meaning, changing my experience from emotionally neutral to some strong feelings of nostalgia as I think about how much I miss this person. The energy for how I experienced that statue and that particular moment in the environment was inside of me before I even looked at it. The energy that changed the feelings I was experiencing did not come from the statue or really have anything to do with that statue. My unique mental structure caused me to experience that statue the way in which I did. It took on a new meaning as I changed my perspective because of the way the energy that was already inside of me acted on my perception. If I hadn't had the positive experiences with the person the statue reminded me of, then I would have continued to experience indifference as I looked at it. The relationship between perceptions and emotions. The energy that determines how we feel, love, hate, happiness, anger, confidence, fear, etc., in many circumstances and situations does not come from the environment. These feelings and emotions are already part of us, and we will automatically feel them when there is a matchup, perception, between what is outside in the now moment with what is already inside of us as a result of our past experiences. For example, imagine a father holding his 5-year-old son with one hand, screaming, "You stupid idiot," while spanking him with the other hand. And let's assume that this is the first time the child has heard the words stupid or idiot. Now he may not know what the words mean in an adult context, but he will most certainly connect the words with pain he is feeling through both his body as well as his ears. From that point forward, these words will have a strong negative charge attached to them in his mental environment. Now, when he encounters these words in the environment again in some future moment, he will be able to recognize them because he has experienced these words. They exist as a distinction in his mental environment. As a result of the way in which he learned the meaning of these words, how will his perception of them affect his experience of them? Whenever he hears the words stupid or idiot, he will feel the negatively charged energy connected to these words in his mental environment and consequently experience the physical environment in a painful way. Does the environment need to physically assault him, as in the first experience, for him to feel this pain? No. All he has to do is hear the words and he will experience pain. After his first encounter with these words, the pain doesn't have to come directly from the environment because it is already inside of him. Would it make any difference if from the environment's perspective that the words were spoken with absolutely no intent to cause him any pain or without any awareness that they could, in fact, cause him to feel pain? Again, no. He would not be able to perceive the intent of the environment as anything but wanting to cause him pain because that is exactly what he experiences when he hears those words. How could he know that other alternative meanings exist for these words or that they can also be used within a context of good-natured fun? He couldn't, because he has never experienced those words in any kind of fun context. He hasn't learned to make that distinction yet. From the perspective of his mental environment, there are no other alternative possibilities for the meaning of these words. Furthermore, he may never learn to make any alternative distinctions, because every time he hears the words stupid or idiot, he will perceive them in a painful way, thereby creating an experience of pain, which will in turn reinforce the negative energy already connected to the meaning for those words. From the first experience forward into the future, he will be locked into only one version of the way he can experience those words. In any given moment, there are a whole range of experiences available from the environment. What we experience as individuals will be a function of what we perceive, unless we are in a learning mode. In other words, what we are experiencing in any given moment is being shaped by what is already inside of us: memories, distinctions, associations, and beliefs, and what is already inside of us may not be remotely close to what the environment is offering in the way of experience. When we are in a learning mode, we open ourselves up to learn new distinctions and alternative meanings to expand what we know about the nature of the environment. Our experiences shape our meanings, and then the meanings shape our experiences of the future. Let me illustrate this concept for you. I was watching a local television program in spring 1987 called Gotcha Chicago. It was about some local celebrities who played practical jokes on other Chicago notables. In one segment of the program, the TV station hired a man to stand on the sidewalk along Michigan Avenue holding a sign that read, "Free money, today only." For those of you who are not familiar with Chicago, Michigan Avenue is home to many of the most expensive and fashionable department stores and boutiques in the city. The man's pockets were stuffed with cash, and he had been instructed to give money to anyone who asked for it. Considering that Michigan Avenue is one of the busiest areas of the city, how many people do you think took him up on his offer and asked for some money? Out of all the people who walked by and read the sign, only one person stopped and said, "Great. May I have a quarter to buy a bus transfer?" Otherwise, no one would even go near him. Eventually, he grew frustrated and started crying out, "Do you want any money? Please take my money. I can't give it away fast enough." Everybody just walked around him as though he didn't exist. He approached one businessman asking, "Would you like some money?" And the man responded, "Not today." The plant said, "How many days does this happen?" as he tried to give him a handful of cash, while continuing to say, "Would you please take this?" The businessman responded with a terse, "No," and walked on. Now here is a situation where the environment was expressing itself in a way that only one person had the mental structure to perceive. For the rest of the people, there was no meaning inside of them that they could directly correlate with the actual environmental conditions. Other than the one person who asked for a quarter, nobody looked at the sign and said to themselves, "Great. Somebody is giving away free money. I wonder how much he will give me." People's responses to the conditions shouldn't be too surprising because we generally don't believe that money is ever free. And we can know what people believed about the situation by just observing their behavior. If they thought that it was possible to get free money, we can assume that they would not have walked by, ignoring the opportunity to get some. So the meaning they attached and what they experienced corresponded to their belief that free money isn't possible or nobody gives away money on the street, no strings attached. In fact, most people probably thought he was crazy, which would explain why people went out of their way to walk around him to avoid contact. However, the environment was expressing itself in exactly the way in which it was representing itself. The sign reading, "Free money," was the truth, but the information, "free money," did not connect with anything in anyone's mental environment so that it could be perceived as the truth. There was a direct one-to-one relationship between what any given individual believed, what he perceived, and what he experienced except for one man. Everyone else obviously did not believe in the possibility of free money. They probably perceived a crazy man and thus had an erroneous experience relative to the conditions. Now, the environment did not choose the meaning any of these people placed on the information it was offering. And if the environment did not choose, then each individual created his own experience out of the situation that was presented to him. There were a number of alternate experiences available, and each alternate experience would correspond to the type of belief someone would have about the possibilities. Beliefs. Beliefs create definitions, make distinctions, and shape our perception of environmental information by programming our senses to hear, see, and select information that corresponds with what we believe. Our experience of the environment will correspond to the choices we make, and these choices will correspond to the information that is perceivable. What is perceivable to each individual, however, may not have much of a relationship to what is available or possible from the environment's perspective. Each person in the illustration of free money would claim that what he experienced was, in fact, the true reality of the situation. What would cause them to believe anything different? People think of their beliefs and subsequent experiences as a fact of reality instead of a belief about reality. This is natural because beliefs create a relationship with the environment that is best described as circular or a closed loop. What I mean by a closed loop is that every component part in the process of how we experience the environment supports every other component, making everything seem self-evident or beyond question. These closed-loop systems that beliefs create are extremely difficult to open up. The belief controls the information coming into the mental system. The information that is actually perceived will be consistent with the belief. The course of action taken will be consistent with the information perceived, and the subsequent experience will support and reinforce the validity of the belief. This is a closed system that will not allow for the possibility of other alternatives because the experiences keep on reinforcing the beliefs, making the beliefs seem increasingly more self-evident and beyond question. Unless we are open or even know how to be open to new information that could lead to new experiences, we will experience the closed-loop nature of our beliefs every moment, assuming the whole time that what we experienced in each situation was the only possibility available. The people who walked by the man giving away free money didn't know they were completely oblivious to the possibility of the environment expressing itself in such a manner, even though the sign said, "Free money." And if confronted with the same set of environmental conditions again, they would behave the same way as the first time, not knowing that other distinctions are possible, even if they are remote. The perception and the experience have to match up because we can't experience something that we don't know about yet, unless we are open to the possibility that what we believe might be very limiting in relationship to what the environment is offering. Remember the man who refused to take the money even when it was being handed to him? He was being offered an experience that would have increased the number of distinctions he could make about the nature of the environment. Free money does exist, and he would have grown mentally as a result. Being given free money was obviously a distinction he didn't know about yet. And even though it would seem that free money would be a powerful incentive to question one's belief that it doesn't exist, it wasn't enough for this man. His beliefs obviously did not allow him to even remotely consider the possibility, again creating this closed loop, leading him to believe that what he ended up with or experienced out of this situation was the true nature of his existence, when all it really was a reflection of the true nature of his beliefs and how they manage environmental information. Beliefs define the parameters in which we perceive environmental information. All definitions by definition create boundaries. Beliefs will manage information in various ways to maintain a balance between the inner and outer environment. Any perceived imbalance will result in some degree of either stress or illusion. In maintaining a balance, many of our responses to environmental conditions are automatic because our beliefs make the response seem self-evident, when, in fact, under any given set of environmental conditions, alternate experiences exist alongside of the experiences our beliefs locked us into. By inhibiting the flow of information into the mental system, beliefs do exactly what they are supposed to do. They limit our awareness of data so that we can learn in stages. If we believe that things exist in only one particular way, then our beliefs will act as a natural mechanism to block the acceptance of any conflicting information. Considering or accepting any new or conflicting information would open up choices that we ordinarily would not have to consider. Too many choices too soon can cause confusion and mental overload. If it were not for the limiting nature of beliefs, what would happen to our minds would probably be similar to what it would be like if a television set picked up all the information being broadcast from all the TV stations and projected that information onto the screen simultaneously on the same channel. Beliefs allow us to tune into one channel of environmental information at a time so that we can learn about the nature of the environment through that one channel. Then we can expand our awareness to pick up another channel as we learn how to deal with the additional choices we are confronted with as we become aware of the additional possibilities. How our fears function to create the experience we are trying to avoid. What we perceive is a function of the distinctions that we have learned to make. What we focus our attention on, out of all the distinctions we have learned to perceive, is a function of the intensity of the energy in the perception loop. We only have so much of our conscious attention to give to whatever information happens to be available in any given moment. Fear, high degree of negatively charged energy, has a profoundly limiting effect on the range of information that we can pay attention to. It causes us to narrow our range of perception to focus our attention onto the object of our fears. How else could we avoid what we perceive as threatening? Learning to drive is an excellent example that illustrates how fear narrows our focus of attention. The dangers of driving are obvious even to someone who has never driven before. It isn't too difficult to imagine the harmful effects of a head-on collision. Without having developed the necessary skills to control the car, the new driver would lack the confidence to know that he can respond appropriately to any given situation. That is, he doesn't trust himself. As a result, he will feel some degree of uncomfortableness or fear when he drives. The fear will, in turn, cause him to focus his attention on the oncoming traffic or concentrate on the eye-hand coordination necessary to keep the car in the appropriate lane. Because he is so focused on what he can't do and what may happen as a result, he has little if any of his attention available to do anything else, like carry on a conversation with a passenger, notice the scenery in his peripheral vision, or even read road signs. All this other environmental information is available and perceivable, but in his case it is either blocked or unnoticed because he has to devote so much of his attention to the object of his fear, the lack of control he has over the car. At the point where he becomes comfortable with his ability to drive safely, his field of awareness will open up, allowing him to perceive all this other information. The purpose of fear is to help us avoid those things in the environment we have learned to perceive as threatening. However, when we couple our painful memories with our natural propensity to associate and group environmental components together, instead of avoiding the object of our fears, we will actually create the very experiences we are trying to avoid. For example, a child severely bitten by a dog will quite naturally associate all dogs with the threat of pain and consequently generate an intense fear or even terror whenever he encounters any dog in the future. The child's fear of all other dogs other than the one that bit him is real. He has no way of making a distinction between a friendly and a dangerous dog because his personal experience has taught him that all dogs are dangerous. Because of this natural propensity to associate, all we need is one first-time experience to believe that all dogs are dangerous. That is his truth about the nature of the environment. However, his truth is not all the environment has to offer in the way of experiences in relationship to dogs. Not every dog that exists is dangerous. Quite the contrary, very few would be considered threatening. Most see a child and want to play. Now, in every chance encounter the child has with a dog in the future, he will create an experience of terror, regardless of the disposition of any particular dog he happens to run into. If a dog makes any movement toward the child will perceive that movement as an actual attack when all the dog wanted to do was play or be petted. In fact, the child could become so afraid of being attacked that he will devote most if not all of his attention to scanning the surrounding environment for dogs. Eventually, his senses will become attuned to picking up their sights and sounds. And every time he sees or hears one, he will create another terrifying experience that just reinforces his fears. His focus of attention will attract to his attention the object of his fears so that he can avoid what he has learned is threatening. The problem is that what he has learned is erroneous in relationship to the conditions, that not all dogs are dangerous. Not knowing that, he will naturally believe that his terror is coming from outside him instead of inside him. In effect, his fears are acting on his perception to create the very experiences he is trying to avoid by causing him to hone in on all the dogs in the environment. What we focus our attention on in the environment is what we will usually get. The dog biting example is a graphic illustration of this. However, there are other ways that our fears act as a cause to create what we are trying to avoid that aren't so obvious. Remember that all fears act on our perception as a warning mechanism to help us avoid what we believe to be threatening. One way to avoid the object of our fears is simply to refuse to acknowledge the existence of threatening information. Another more subtle way that will create some real blind spots in our perception is to focus all our attention on alternative, non-threatening information to the exclusion of everything else. These blind spots will exclude whole categories of perceivable information from our awareness, which can result in some disastrous consequences, especially in the trading environment. For example, let's say that the market is offering us what we believe to be a good opportunity to make some money, so we go ahead and put on a trade. But at the same time we are also operating out of a fear of being wrong. We will fear being wrong because, if we are, it will force us to feel whatever negative energy has accumulated inside of us as a result of being wrong in the past. Now, if the market offers us a choice between information that would indicate we are right or information that would indicate that we are wrong, what information will we naturally focus our attention on? The information that will make us right, without acknowledging or considering the implications of the information that would indicate otherwise. Again, those implications could be disastrous. Let's look at another example of a trader who is afraid of losing. A fear of losing presents an obvious conflict because it would be difficult to put on a trade in the first place. However, for the sake of this example, let's say this trader was so attracted to a specific opportunity that he managed to operate outside of his fear long enough to put on a trade. Now, the kind of information he focuses his attention on will depend on what the market does. If the market goes against him, he will be afraid to confront the possibility of another loss, so he will focus his attention on any other non-threatening information. If the market happens to come back to his entry point, he will exit the trade in a sigh of relief, regardless of what the potential is for any further movement in his direction. But, if the market continues to go against him, his mental defenses will begin to break down as the threatening information becomes just too overwhelming for him to be able to block from his awareness any longer. At that point, he could easily become paralyzed and not be able to do anything on his behalf. Eventually, his stress and anxiety will become so acute that the only way he can relieve it is by getting out of the trade. On the other hand, if he finds himself in a winning trade, he will focus on completely different information. His fear of losing will cause him to focus his attention on what the market can take away from him. In a winning trade, he will exclude from his awareness any information that would indicate what the potential is for the market to continue to move in his direction, which is the only information he focused on in a losing trade, and instead focus exclusively on information that will confirm his fears of the market, retracing back to his entry point or beyond. In effect, his fear of losing causes him to exit the trade early for a small profit regardless of whatever the possible profit potential was in that trade. Once he is out, if the market continues to move in his original direction, he will agonize over the profits he left on the table and wonder why he just couldn't hang in there just a little longer, not realizing that his fear of losing actually caused him to lose all those additional profits. What you have just been given is an example of why the vast majority of traders cut their profits short and let their losses run. In a winning trade, the fear of losing will cause us to focus our attention on information that the market is going to take our profits away, compelling us to get out early. In a losing trade, we will focus our attention on just the opposite information, anything other than that which would indicate the trade is a loser. Fear causes us to act without a perception of choice. When we are afraid to confront certain categories of market information, it drastically limits the choices that we perceive as available. Cutting a loss isn't a choice if we systematically block from our awareness any information that would indicate that we are in a losing trade. Staying in a winner isn't a choice if we are consumed with the fear that the market is going to take away our money. To prevent these blind spots in our perception, we have to learn to trade without fear. And to trade without fear, we need to completely trust ourselves to confront and accept whatever information the market is offering about itself. And we need to be able to trust ourselves to know that we will always act in our best interests without hesitation, regardless of the conditions. Any endeavor will require some degree of trust. We would find it difficult to cross the street if we didn't trust ourselves to be able to get out of the way of the oncoming traffic. From a psychological perspective, the market environment can wreak just as much havoc in our lives as getting hit by a car. To be successful as traders, we need to believe that we can win with an absence of fear so we can make better assessments of the conditions and perceive more choices. What this means is that we have to do the necessary mental work to release ourselves from anything within us that would cause us to narrow our focus of attention or specifically block certain categories of information from our awareness. End of Chapter 10. Hope you enjoy this audiobook. Please share and subscribe. Thank you.